Just imagine this for a second. A world so broken that people would stand in line for hours just for free coffee and donuts. I mean, for blocks. This wasn't some ancient history. This was the reality for millions. So, the big question is, how on earth did the world's richest country fall so far, so fast?
Hey everyone, welcome. So today, we're going to dive deep and really dissect one of the most devastating economic events in modern history, the Great Depression. It's really a story of this incredible boom, a catastrophic bust, in a world that was, well, changed forever. Let's jump right in.
Okay, so to really get a handle on the collapse, you've got to understand the party that came right before it. We're talking about the 1920s in America, the legendary Roaring Twenties. This was a decade of just explosive growth and what felt like, endless optimism.
So where did all this start? Well, it really kicked off with the Great War. While Europe was just devastated, America basically became the world's factory. Get this, its total exports more than doubled in just 4 years. That flooded the country with cash and kicked off this absolutely massive economic boom.
And this boom, it fueled a total consumer revolution. All of a sudden, new tech like cars and radios weren't just for the rich, they were within reach for so many people. And the big question is, how? The answer is easy credit. Banks were handing out loans like crazy. The installment plan, the EMI system we all know today, was born, and everyone from factory workers to their bosses, started pouring their money, both savings and borrowed cash, into a stock market that, well, it only seemed to go up. But here's the thing. This whole frantic prosperity, it was basically built on a house of cards, a really fragile foundation. And that decade-long party, it was about to come to a shocking, sudden, and very abrupt end. The warning signs were definitely there. As early as March 1929, this really prominent banker, Paul Warburg, he delivered this chilling message straight to the president. He could see it clear as day. The market wasn't about real value anymore. It was pure speculation. He called it a gambling den. And just tragically, nobody listened. And when it unraveled, it happened terrifyingly fast. It all started with this little tremor on October 22nd. Then came Black Thursday, a massive 11% drop that kicked off widespread panic. But the final, fatal blow, that came the next week on Black Tuesday, when the floor just completely fell out from under everyone.
So just to put that collapse into perspective for you, think about this number, $14 billion. That is how much wealth just vanished, poof, in a single day. And remember, we're talking 1929 money. It was a financial cataclysm on a scale that was just unimaginable.
Now you might think, okay, that's a problem for the rich guys on Wall Street. But no, this wasn't just about wealthy investors. The shockwave from this crash was about to slam into every single person on Main Street, and it was going to trigger a truly devastating chain reaction.
Here's how that domino effect worked. So the crash triggered this vicious cycle. First, the investors got wiped out. Okay, so what? Well, that meant they couldn't repay the loans they'd taken from the banks. That, in turn, caused the banks themselves to fail. We're talking over 11,000 of them, and when they went down, they took the life savings of ordinary people with them. Now, with no money, people obviously stopped buying stuff. And if no one's buying, well, factories have no choice but to shut their doors and lay people off.
And the end result of all that? By 1933, the unemployment rate in the U.S. hit a staggering 25%. And let's be clear, this isn't just a statistic. This means that if you walk down any street, 1 out of every 4 workers had no job, no income, and no way to feed their family. Just think about that.
For the millions of people who lost their homes, this was the new reality. These shanty towns, made out of scrap metal and wood, they just popped up all over the country. People bitterly nicknamed them Hoovervilles, which was a direct angry jab at President Hoover, who so many people blamed for the crisis.
And this economic sickness that started in America? Oh, it was highly contagious. You see, the U.S. was the world's biggest economy and its biggest lender. So when it collapsed, it was pretty much guaranteed to drag the rest of the world down with it. So here's exactly how it spread across the globe. The U.S. was desperate for cash, right? So it started demanding that war-torn European nations pay back their loans immediately. And at the exact same time, it jacked up taxes on imports, basically building a wall around its own market. That 1-2 punch was a complete death blow for international trade.
And just like that, the dominoes started to fall all over the world. Austria's biggest bank failed, which triggered a massive banking crisis all over Europe. In Germany, all that economic despair, it created the perfect breeding ground for extremism, fueling the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party.
Even the mighty British Empire was forced to abandon the gold standard, that old system that tied their currency's value to actual gold. And it didn't stop there. In places like India, a total collapse in prices for things like wheat and jute absolutely ruined millions of farmers.
So the question is, how did the world finally climb out of this decade-long hole? Well, the recovery was really driven by two massive, world-altering forces: a brand new political deal and, tragically, a new world war.
Okay, so in 1933, a new president comes along, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he takes a radically different approach. His New Deal was this huge, sweeping set of government programs. The whole point was to create jobs, get the banks under control, and just inject some confidence back into the system. It totally and fundamentally changed the relationship between the government and the economy.
And look, the New Deal definitely provided crucial relief. It started to turn the tide. But the final knockout blow to the Depression, that actually came from a completely different and much darker source: the outbreak of World War II. The absolutely colossal demand for weapons and supplies is what truly jump-started America's factories again and, for all intents and purposes, ended mass unemployment.
And you can see the impact pretty clearly. The New Deal made a real dent, for sure. It cut unemployment from that insane peak of 25% all the way down to about 14% by 1937. Now, that's a huge improvement, but it was still a long, long way from the full recovery that the war would eventually bring.
So it's important to remember that the Great Depression wasn't just a decade of terrible hardship. It was more like a crucible, one that forged an entirely new world. And it left behind a legacy that we are absolutely still living with today.
And I mean, the transformation was total. Think about it. In less than 2 decades, the world went from being centered on Europe to being dominated by the US. Economies flipped from being tied to gold to being actively managed by governments. We saw the birth of the social safety net, the idea of the welfare state. And it was the beginning of the end for the old colonial empires. A massive, massive shift.
So, if there's one really important takeaway from all this, it's this. The crisis forced a complete rethink of everything. It just shattered old economic beliefs. And it led directly to new regulations and institutions, things you probably heard of, like deposit insurance for banks and government oversight of the stock market, all created with one single goal: to make sure this could never, ever happen again.
When you boil it all down, the story of the Great Depression is captured perfectly right here. It wasn't just about the damage, about the suffering. It was about change, a fundamental turning point for the entire world. And that leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time, doesn't it? The Great Depression was really the first huge lesson in just how fragile our interconnected global economy can be. So now, almost a century later, with our world more connected than we could ever have imagined, it really forces us to ask ourselves, have we truly learned that lesson? Are we really prepared for the next global shock?